Welcome back to the Transform Your Mind to Transform Your Life, the podcast. You're listening to Author's Corner, where we highlight and showcase our local authors. Today, I am speaking to Shelby Cook, author of Finding Calm Within Chaos, a complete guide to anxiety management. Welcome, Shelby.
Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. All right, so let me give you guys a brief introduction to Shelby's book. In Finding Calm Without Chaos, a complete guide to anxiety management, Shelby Cook provides a practical roadmap for understanding and navigating anxiety. Unveiling the intricacies of anxiety disorders, this guide delves into types, neurobiology, and common symptoms, demystifying the complexities surrounding anxiety. Dispelling prevalent myths, the book offers clear insights, making anxiety more approachable for all. This comprehensive guide then transitions into coping strategies, including grounding techniques, cognitive behavioral approaches, and personalized management plans. Engaging activities like creative outlets and journaling are explored, along with the crucial role families play in supporting loved ones. The book doesn't just stop at information. It empowers readers to craft their own personalized anxiety management plan, fostering resilience and addressing setbacks. Awesome. Shelby, I spent a lot of time in this show talking about anxiety, depression, trauma, big T trauma, little T trauma, because that's all part of, having the best life possible. And, I was introduced to anxiety attacks when I had a friend that I was working with in my office that was coming off of addiction to heroin. And one of the side effects was anxiety. So I want to start off by maybe you can give us an example of what happens when you have an anxiety attack.
Absolutely. So anxiety looks a little bit different for everyone, but I think the most important hallmark symptom is this excessive worrying. So the worrying doesn't stop, and it can be about little things or everyday situations, and the size of the worry is much bigger than the actual threat or the actual event or commitment that you need to accomplish. So when we think about anxiety, I think about it and how does it affect your body, the physical symptoms? So is your heart racing out of your chest? Are you having heart palpitations? Are your hands shaking or sweaty or clammy? I always say your shoulders are earrings. So that muscle tension that we tend to just keep our bodies tight when we're feeling stressed, overwhelmed, and anxious, not realizing it. And difficulties with the psychological symptoms. So on top of the excessive worrying that we talked about, the restlessness, having a hard time relaxing, hard time unwinding, difficulty concentrating, and then avoidance. So this tendency or desire, our brain tells us, we'll just won't do the thing that causes us anxiety. That way we don't have anxiety. But we know that really doesn't work. Makes anxiety worse and makes your world really, really small. The more you avoid, the less interaction and less things you are doing day to day. And we also see the behavioral symptom on top of avoidance of procrastination, putting things off. This is especially common for folks who have some perfectionistic tendencies, fear of failure, feeling inadequate, feeling like their presentation's not good enough, tend to wait till the last possible second when the risk is very high to get that thing done. And withdrawing from people like friends, family, social activities or clubs that you're involved in. And then the cognitive symptoms. So the catastrophizing, as we call it, expecting that the worst case scenario is always going to happen. And that if that worst case scenario happens, life is over. We're doomed. Something terrible is going to happen.
Wow.
And that leads to difficulty making decisions too, right? Because if everything feels like life or death, it can be really hard to make a decision and feel confident in the decision that you did make because it feels like the stakes are really high when really that might not be the case at all.
Yeah, that's good. That's a pretty good list of explanations of what anxiety looks like. as you were talking, I remember the one that I was presented with my friend. She couldn't go outside without her boyfriend. He was like her safe person.
Mhm.
So you called it avoidance, and I love the way you put it. Your world gets really small if you don't want to do the things that will cause you anxiety. So, but what is the difference of that kind of anxiety and the anxiety going for a job interview?
Yeah, so there's eustress, EU stress, which is stress for something that's positive. Still causes us some anxiety and some worry, but the outcome is something positive. So that could be a job interview, graduation, birth of a baby, weddings, those kinds of things. And distress is the negative anxiety, anxiety about death, dying, significant fears, things that cause anxiety and stress, but don't have that positive outcome or that positive association like eustress does.
Okay. That's good. All right. So it's positive stress and negative stress. I like that. All right. So your book is called a guide. So can you describe one or two key strategies in your book for managing this anxiety? So let's look at the one that I just presented. You have anxiety to go outside because you need a safe person, or you have anxiety to, I don't know, whatever, you're in this space. So what would you tell someone as a key strategy to manage that particular anxiety?
My favorite little tidbit of advice is do it scared. So yes, anxiety is going to be present. Stress is going to be present. You might be sweaty. You might feel overwhelmed. But if we avoid, we're feeding that anxiety. So if you avoid it, anxiety gets worse with time. Your world is shrinking more and more and more. And if you don't do it, if you don't do the thing that you're avoiding, like going outside on your own, anxiety is driving the bus. So doing things scared gives you some control and helps manage that impulse to avoid. So that can help us in turn manage some of that anxiety, because anxiety tends to decrease when we feel like we have some control or some autonomy over the situation.
Yeah, well, that's good. They say to face the fear, which is another subset of anxiety, I imagine. But how many people do that? What's the percentage of people that's going to feel the fear and do it anyway? Which is one of the...
Not a huge amount. Because avoidance feels good, let's be honest. It serves a purpose, right? So if we avoid, our anxiety is less, in the moment at least. So that tendency is really, really high. And sometimes it's really simple, small steps that can help reduce that avoidance. Maybe going outside or going in somewhere while her boyfriend's in the car. He's still there, he's around, but she's getting some independence. Is she going to be scared? Probably. But once you teach yourself, these situations, though they cause me fear and anxiety, are going to kill me, that anxiety level tends to decrease. I think of it as a bell curve. It gets worse before it gets better. And that's one of those instances.
Okay, that's good. I like that one about, small baby steps. You bring the boyfriend out, you leave him in the car and go into the grocery. So you have some kind of semblance of safety.
Yes.
Because, I don't even understand why you would need a boyfriend to feel safe. It's not like we're going to war, but I guess it's something that your brain is telling you that you need. So I understand that. Right. Okay. So let's talk about someone who is overwhelmed by anxiety and don't know where to start. So a typical example would be, so one of the, we talked about shrinking your world because you don't want to do things that makes you anxious. But so maybe you can give an example of someone that's overwhelmed by anxiety, because I can't think of any. And they don't know where to start to get rid of that anxiety.
I would say start with the lowest hanging fruit, the thing that's the easiest. So you're not going to want to say, I'm very scared of heights, let's go skydiving, right? Let's start small with something tiny. Maybe it's going to
an elevator.
Yes, an elevator, right? Something small, risk is low. If we start with skydiving, something called flooding happens. And that's where you're so overwhelmed. You're not feeling safe enough at all to manage that anxiety. And you're saying, oh my gosh, I felt like I was going to die, which is just heightening that anxiety, which is doing the opposite of what we're trying to do. So I think of it as kind of a ladder. So let's start with the easiest thing on the bottom and incremental small steps to the top, to the thing that causes the most distress. So we're going to practice each step several times to achieve habituation, or this response that is actually a lack of response. We're no longer feeling that significant anxiety and stress. So mapping it out, giving us some kind of game plan, and making sure that the steps really are small enough. I think there's this pressure of, oh my gosh, I need to get better right now because anxiety is interfering with my work life, my relationships, my quality of sleep, all these different areas. But really, it's important to give yourself some grace. Managing anxiety can be difficult and it can be frustrating if you try something to manage that anxiety and it doesn't get better. So it is important to kind of plan accordingly, create a roadmap, and set yourself up for success, because it is tricky. And starting with a small, simple step is the best place to start.
Yeah, I was watching a Netflix documentary the other day, and they were talking about this woman that got caught in a storm in Puerto Rico, and she was afraid for her kid's life, and she came out with full-blown anxiety. So what they did, they part of her management plan was to sign up for a first responder kind of thing. So they had her become like a fake first responder so that she can see what happens when someone is in distress or whatever, And my son-in-law have a fear of bridges. I don't know how you can help that one, because you can't go over a little part of the bridge. But whenever he goes over a bridge, he's pretty anxious. So I guess it depends on what you're anxious about. But what I told him is what the message of that film is that you got to present yourself with whatever you're anxious about, like you're saying, and sooner or later it's going to decrease, right? So, right. Okay.
Yeah. So it could be, in that instance, driving past the bridge. So if the bridge is on, the perpendicular road, driving past it until that no longer triggers a fear response. Because yes, as you mentioned, you can't go like 10 feet on the bridge and then reverse backwards. That's not going to have a good outcome.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Listen, this is a serious conversation. I'm laughing about it, but it's a serious conversation when you're anxious and you're afraid, and I love what you say about your world gets smaller because you're not doing a whole bunch of things because you're anxious. And when you feed one thing, it grows, right? Yes. Whatever you feed grows. So you might start off being anxious about a bridge or a dog or any of those things, and sooner and later you've got a whole bunch of things in your quiver that makes you anxious or afraid. So your book is a great book. It is finding calm within chaos. So yeah, when your brain is going, find something to calm you down. So what inspired you to write the book, Finding Calm Within Chaos, A Complete Guide to Anxiety Management?
Yeah, so I'm a psychotherapist by trade. My clinical expertise is in trauma, and my particular focus in my clinical work was combat trauma. And so we know that often, though not always, anxiety follows a traumatic event. And so that was something I worked with constantly. And I think, just because you don't have trauma doesn't mean you don't have anxiety, or just because you have anxiety doesn't mean you have trauma. So anxiety is one of those things that we know impacts a lot of people, even if it's subclinical. So even if it doesn't meet the criteria or the significance or level to be an anxiety disorder, it can still really wreak havoc on your life. So that's kind of where I decided to start. So I stepped away from clinical practice and I spend my time exclusively running my business. And I've always loved teaching and training, especially to therapists. It's kind of my favorite thing. And I found myself making all kinds of different psychoeducational materials that therapists could use with their clients. With more than 75 therapists on my team, there's lots of, subspecialties and questions that people want to explore. So I found myself just typing away in my free time, making infographics and handouts and all kinds of different things. So I'm not a graphic designer by any stretch, but I really loved doing it. So this kind of came from a place of being really passionate about making mental health resources more accessible. So I started by creating all kinds of freebies, if you will. And that then grew into something larger because, I wanted to expand access beyond the clients that we have at Cook Counseling. So I started writing blogs. So sharing research-based content with readers on important, new, trending mental health topics. And I found a love for writing that I didn't know existed. And it kind of spurred this mission to share resources with everyone. With therapy, we're limited by our geographic location, but anyone can read a blog anywhere in the world. With Google, you can translate just about anything. Likewise with that psychoeducational material, those different diagrams and courses and things. So I still publish a blog on my website every Tuesday at 10 a.m. because I know, this information is important to my readers and subscribers. And slowly this morphed and grew into my book, Finding Calm Within Chaos.
Yeah, well, that's pretty good. So when you said that you started off with combat trauma, were you in the Army or were you were you in the Army or were you dealing with the veterans or how did?
Yeah, so I've been in the Army for about 7 years. And I joined after graduate school. So after finishing my master's in social work, I joined, was enlisted for about 4.5 years and then commissioned as a behavioral health officer. So offering assessments and interventions with our service members, like pre and post deployment, or if something pops up in life, we're kind of there for that. And then my partner, Jeremy, he is an Iraqi war veteran with free combat tours. So I kind of found myself really immersed in the culture, the military culture. I did work with the USO, did work with the VA, and really kind of just found my niche there. There's lots of great therapists who work with PTSD and trauma in the military population. There's not a lot of veterans or military service members that work in that arena. So I felt like it's important to, my own lived experience, the experiences that are shared with me by my partner and my clients, kind of really, I found my spot there.
Yeah, that's a great spot. Great spot. I love it. Yeah, I wouldn't think that convict veterans had a lot of anxiety. I know it's PTSD. So is anxiety a part of the PTSD spectrum or something totally different?
Yeah, absolutely. So PTSD is its own condition that develops or can develop after experiencing, witnessing, or being told about a traumatic event. And anxiety is one of those very, very common symptoms of PTSD that we see manifesting through what we call hypervigilance. So always being on guard or on alert, on watch. Panic attacks is something that we see in PTSD a lot. And then those racing thoughts and that constant worry is something that we see as part of that PTSD spectrum as well. So lots and lots of overlap there in terms of trying to treat those anxiety symptoms and also combat avoidance, another symptom of PTSD, kind of all at the same time in treatment.
Wow. This is important work. I am so grateful that I can share your work with the world. So tell our listeners where they can pick up a copy of your book. I know you've already followed me on social media, so I know you have a social media handle. And if you have a website, you can share it now.
Absolutely. So you can find my book on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Etsy currently. I also have my courses and freebies at www.ccc614.thinkific.com. So Thinkific is a learning platform and Cook Counseling and Consulting is long. So CCC614 is where you can find that. You can find us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube with the handle Cook Counseling and Consulting. And then similarly, my website is www.cookcounselingandconsulting.com. And there's a tab called Self-Help. And that's where I post blogs weekly. And you can also sign up for the newsletter to get those right in your inbox every Tuesday at 10 a.m.
I love it. I didn't know people publish blogs at a certain time. It's got to be the Army militant.
It is. Very routine.
I love that, which is one of the reasons I love people from the Army, because they teach you, they teach you these life skills that are so important. Yes. All right. Well, listen, Shelby, this has been a great interview. I am, like I said, I'm glad to share your work with my audience. I know it's important work. It's an important book. And what you're doing for the military population is important as well. I'm glad that we kind of bridged the gap, what happens with PTSD and anxiety, to expand on that. So that's pretty good. All right, guys, I will have a transcript of my conversation with Shelby on the show page, which is myhelps.us. I would also link out to her website, to social media handles, and her book, so that you guys can go pick up a copy and support her. And this is pretty good information to have, whether it's for yourself or for a loved one. So thank you, Shelby, for being on the show. As we wrap up, any last words?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to share what I know, and hopefully motivate some folks in the audience to make a tiny baby step towards that thing that causes them a little bit of fear.
It's beautiful. Yes, tiny step. I love that. Yes, you don't need to make the big baby steps, like you say. Go skydiving. Yeah, yes. And I love that advice about, if you're anxious about something, do little baby steps. Maybe go outside in the backyard if you're afraid to go outside, or, take someone with you, and then, leave them in the car. Yes, I love that. And I'm pretty sure you have much more in-depth skills and strategies in your book. So yes. So thank you guys for tuning in to this week's episode of Author's Corner. Again, Shelby's book is called Finding Calm Within Chaos, a complete guide to anxiety management. Thanks again for tuning in. Thank you, Shelby, for being on the show. Until next time, namaste.